Hi, my name is Caleb Lindsay, and this is going to be my week 2 submission for FTH 223. Today's date is April 3rd, 2026. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and clear the firearm, right? So first, by removing the magazine, make sure there's nothing in there. I'm going to go ahead and lock the slide to the rear. I'm going to visually and physically inspect the chamber, make sure there's nothing there. There is not, so we are clear. All right, so we've got it taken apart completely. Next, I'm going to pick like 6 components. We're going to talk about those 6 components, about like what it's like if, or what happens if they fail, and if it's dangerous to the operator if it does. So the first thing I picked was going to be the trigger bar. Okay, so the trigger bar attaches between the trigger and the sear, which would sit right back here. And then these tabs right here are also what disconnects the fire control group by pushing it down after you fire. So with that knowledge, basically, if this thing does start to fail, it kind of depends on where the failure is. Now, if it's up in the tabs, you could have like a failure to disconnect. Then on the back side, if it starts to get worn out or broken back here, then you're not going to be able to manipulate your sear. Next component that I wanted to talk about was the hammer. Okay, so on the hammer, you have a couple of slots for pins. One is going to be going to your decocking disconnector, and then the other side is going to go to your strut with the hammer pin going through the middle. On the hammer, you've got 2 cocking surfaces. On the top here, you've got your half cock surface, and on the bottom you have your single action cocked surface. So for potential failure points in this, I want to talk about the 2 sear surfaces. Okay, so your single action cocking surface and your half cock. So your half cock is actually your safety device. So if you are chambered and full, like cocked or in single action, and let's say this leg right here is worn down and it pops off the sear, then your passive safety here is supposed to catch it. Next, I figured I'd talk about the barrel. Okay, so this barrel for the SARB6 is very similar to a 1911 barrel. That being that it has these locking lugs up top that mate to the inside of the slide right there, if you can see that. Also, down here, unlocking lug right here. It basically takes the place of the unlocking link on a 1911, but it is permanently affixed to the bottom of this barrel, and that's how it operates. So I've never personally seen a handgunned barrel fail. I imagine in this style, right, so kind of like the 1911, the locking lugs over time can become worn out. I know that the link on a 1911 barrel, which sits right around here, can get worn out because that's where like all this energy is being transferred through to start pushing that slide rearward, right? So there's a lot of energy sitting right in this thing right here, so that could potentially be a point of failure. If it becomes too worn out, it can mess with timing, stuff like that. Same with the locking lugs up top. I think the fourth one that I picked here is actually just the firing pin block safety right here, and it's spring. So what it does is it holds on to the firing pin in these notches right here. Okay, so there's a notch on the firing pin, there's a notch on here. If this were to become damaged, like let's say this spring is using its bounce, I guess, and it's not providing any resistance downward, then essentially this firearm is just no longer drop safe. Next, I just thought that this component was kind of interesting. Okay, so in the SARB6, this is your they call it the ejector on the like the parts list that I was looking at, but it's also your sear housing, and it sits inside of the rear housing. Okay, what I thought was kind of cool was the fixed ejector on the front of this. Right, if it becomes damaged, bent, or anything like that, you're going to see problems with ejection. Now, the reason I think this thing is so interesting is because it also affects this guy, which is your sear. Okay. Now, since it's sitting inside of this, if this were to ever become damaged, like the ejector or sear housing, whatever you want to call it, it could potentially affect your sear angle. Okay, sear being my 6th component here, which just operates off the back of your trigger bar. Okay, That's what's releasing this thing. But I just thought it was really interesting that if in the design of this, it's sitting inside of here, kind of like that ish. If this becomes out of tolerance, it could also throw this out of tolerance. All right, so I've got it reassembled. I didn't really take all that long, and we'll go ahead and run through the cycle of operations with this thing. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and take our snap caps or dummy rounds that are in this magazine. Go ahead and feed it in here. So as of right now, it's basically in the position that it would be as if it just fired. Okay, so slide to the rear, hammer is being cocked down, and pushing down on that mainspring, right? So this is the, we'll just say right after the ejected and coming up on cocking. So cocking right here. Next, we're going to go into the feeding, chambering, and locking portions, right? So the slide would end up going back forward. I know that was really fast, but it went forward. Stripped around out of the magazine, pushed it up into the chamber, and then we locked. Okay, so that was feeding, chambering, locking. For locking, what it's doing is the mating surfaces between the slide and the barrel are pushed together and held there by spring tension. And now we get into firing. Okay, so we fire. Okay, hammer falls, hitting the primer, igniting the powder, sending the projectile downrange. Okay, and right after firing, we're going to get back into extracting. So the slide's going to come back. The extractor right here, yep, right there, is going to grab the rim of the case, pull it out of the chamber, and then if I can get this to go fast enough, it'll hit the extractor, sending it out of the ejection port. Okay, so let's try that. Hey, perfect. And then we just went straight back through cocking, feeding, chambering, and locking. Okay, so the very last part of this assignment talks about doing a functions check, and they want it to be done like it was described in the lecture, which is the only thing that I can find, or the only thing I really remember, is the sub-assemblies functions check. So just to cover all my bases, the first thing I'm going to do is a normal firearms functions check. So I am in the cocked position right now. All I have to do is squeeze the trigger and it falls. Okay, so that works. So we'll go ahead and cock it again. I will engage the safety, the manual safety right here. I should be able to squeeze the trigger and it does not fall. Release the safety and it falls. So that was single action. So double action. Squeeze the trigger, and with one trigger pull, it should cock and release the hammer all at the same time. And then releasing the trigger should reset. Okay. Again, engage the safety, and I've got no pull on my trigger whatsoever. Okay. Next, I want to test the reset of the single action because I kind of forgot to do that just a second ago. So I'm going ahead, cock. I'm going to pull the trigger and keep the trigger depressed. I'm going to throw the slide back, so recock, and then you should be able to hear the trigger reset right there. The lecture was talking about taking apart the firearm down to like a field stripped level, so you can kind of verify or do a quick functions check of each of these sub-assemblies, right? So, such as this guy right here, working on our slide, right? One of the assemblies that we would want to check is to make sure that our safety right here, our firing pin safety, was actually functioning. So if I were to push on our firing pin, if I can do this with one hand, you shouldn't be able to see it come out of the breech because the safety is not depressed, right? Which is the case, okay? And then if I had two hands, you'd be able to press down the firing pin safety, push the back of the firing pin, and see it protrude through the breech face right there. Okay, so that's one thing that it was talking about. And another one was looking at your linkages inside of here. So we just got to reset, and then you can run it through this, and you're basically watching everything move together.